right. Welcome, everybody, to the Marvel Cinematic University podcast. I'm going to be one of the hosts for this one's panel. We are going to be doing a preview looking ahead at the Marvels. And so we've assembled a beautiful, beautiful little crew. First, I want to say a quick thank you to our super producer, Jake Christie, for hiding in the corner and taking care of us, making sure that everything runs smoothly while we kind of take the reins here. So real quick, I'm gonna start with Shivani. Hi, can you say hello and let us know how you're doing?
Hello. Well, I am doing okay. I I had to think about that for a second, but I'm excited to do this preview. It's been a while since I've done anything with this community, so excited to be back and talking the Marvels.
Yeah. Yes, and I can echo the doing okay situation. It's been a week of dealing with. I mean, this is somewhat timely. A bunch of like mediocre white men doing a mediocre job at their jobs and then having to take over for them. So, just having to do that whole women labor situation all over again, all the time.
Yay, women!
Yay!
The extra labor tax.
Yes, having to do like actually this document says da 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 da. Oh wow, yeah, that is a discrepancy. Quite. Anyway, Shuo, how are you doing? Welcome.
Good. Yeah, thanks for having me, you guys. So I was telling Shivani that I'm a TV writer. I am not super familiar with the Marvel Universe, but I have seen a bunch of this stuff. And I think what really does interest me is how women are portrayed and what are the stories we're telling and how to untangle the stories of patriarchy within our stories. And actually, I just realized I went to the same school as Iron Man. So does that mean I'm part of the Marvel universe? Okay.
Absolutely.
We're on the same alum committees,
No, it's the multiverse. We're all part of the whole thing,
Exactly.
and everyone's part of the entire thing. So we can't.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I've been watching a lot of Marvel since in the last couple of weeks, and it's very interesting. I have a lot of thoughts.
That's so good. Really quickly, Shivani, you met Shu recently. Can you guys tell a little bit about how you met real quick before we jump in?
Yeah, so I met Shu at the beginning of October 2023 this year at the Working Family Parties convention, where we were both there as representatives and the founding members of the Artist Council for the Working Family Party. If you are not familiar with the Working Family Party, they are what are deemed the Labor Party of America right now. So they are not considered a third party. They actually work along party lines, and they swing more to Democrats, and they endorse Democrats. So they listen to people who are in labor movements. They are majority backed by unions. And then because this year and what this year was for artists, specifically within Hollywood, for TV and film, and writers, from the writer's strike to the actors and SAG strike, right? They listened to the voices coming from those picket lines. And Shu is actually one of the captains from Philadelphia, so one of the strike captains. So yay, Shu, for all the hard work.
From the Writers Guild, yes. And also SAG is still on strike, so hopefully they'll get a good deal soon. And that is one of the issues we have coming up with this premiere, is because there's still a huge part of Hollywood that is still on strike.
Yeah, and that's something I have been thinking about so much going into this one. And it's hard. I don't know, to think especially too about how this is, if I'm correct, like, I mean, I think Captain Marvel was the first female-led MCU movie, but this is like a team, like a all women. And so that's also really disappointing that we're not going to hear from,
that's right,
like Kamala Khan or Iman Vellani and Teyonah Parris and all those other incredible
that
people.
they can't. It feels like they can't put the full support of the cast behind it, right? It's such a shame that they can't market it like they should market it.
Yeah, and this is getting a little, I guess, off script, but like one of the things I'm kind of nervous about too is that with films, you need to do so much, like all the marketing and the contextualizing. And so with this film, especially with the history of all of the backlash, like the really, really sexist, and I'm especially concerned with this one, a lot of racist backlash, so many people are going to be consuming it sort of contextless, and it makes me curious about how like the general public is able to engage with it just purely on its own. Like how much are people going to be thinking about the strikes and the issues that we've had with women's rights, like abortion rights and all of these things recently. All of these kind of political events are very much framing this movie, but I don't know if people are going to go into it kind of thinking about that or not. So, yeah.
Well, even further, like we can even say the current conflict in the Middle East might shape how one character now in this movie is even seen.
Yeah.
And you know, that's something that I don't think anyone had insight into. And then we're, you know, this movie, despite it not having context, has way more backlash. Like this is a preview podcast, and there's more coverage for backlash for a movie who has yet to premiere, and it's a really interesting thing.
Yes, and it's carrying with it the backlash of all of these characters, you know, individual properties kind of with it. So it's just accumulated all this. So anyway, that's why we're here, to try to, I don't know, I guess rally, do the whole she's got help situation. I'm forever an apologist for the girl power scene in Endgame, so come at me if you will. I know it's problematic, but here we are. So the plan that I'd had for tonight, so ideally we're trying to get an idea of what we're stepping into in this movie. So where all the characters are at, what have been kind of their arcs leading up into this point, what are the questions we're looking at seeing being answered in this film, what are the kinds of things we can expect. So I'm just going to start with the first character here that I think who we saw the most recently was Nick Fury. So thoughts on Nick Fury? Last time we saw him was in Secret Invasion, which was pretty unilaterally disliked. So again, kind of
hard to agree
that. So yeah. Any
I also really think it's interesting that like Nick Fury is also our most recent character, and I kind of completely forget because they're really framing this as the women's movie. And like despite Nick Fury being like such a pivotal character in this and what will happen with Secret Invasions, right? So it's very interesting how bad I mean the Secret Wars and so like how bad Secret Invasion was. But also goes back into labor. Secret Invasion was kind of really bad because of visual effects though too, that we saw the visual effects team at Marvel ended up unionizing because of the shows.
It, I think, was one of the first times that I saw the visual effects. I like it pulled me out of the show, and I'm usually pretty forgiving, but by the end I was like, what is that? That's a disaster. So yeah. Shu, any thoughts?
Well, I actually didn't realize that Secret Invasion was one of the things I had to kind of see. But so I'm just pulling up the like 1-star.
So no, you don't need to.
Okay, so yeah, and like I'm just like pulling up the 1-star reviews on Google. And I think it's like the problem with this is it's probably echoed out with like some of the some of the problems with the other series in terms like story development and character development, right? It's like a lot of what I thought when I watched I watched Miss Marvel, and I thought one of the things that I really missed about Miss Marvel was like an interiority of her character.
Yeah.
And same thing with Captain Marvel too, is like I don't know who she is. She's just running from plot A to plot B to plot C in universe A through Z. And to me, that's not something I can connect to on a visceral level.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and I like a lot of these are like, there's too much story in these. It gets a little confusing, and it's like you don't follow these characters in a way that you can identify them. And I think that is kind of like a major criticism of what's been coming out lately.
Yeah.
And
It is definitely overstuffed. Sorry, go on.
And I think that's why maybe some of these characters, especially when they're not white men, it's just harder for the audience to identify with, because we don't see something that's universal about them that everyone can identify with, you know, like oh, their shame or their fear or something like that, you know.
Yeah, and with him, I think what they were really riding on was kind of a return to that character, because Nick Fury, I think largely people really enjoyed him, and he was operating like as the glue of the MCU for a long time, and then kind of, you know, post Endgame with the over influx of so many projects, he just didn't show up as much because, I don't know, Sam Jackson's like super expensive to get on for a gazillion different things. So he was here, and I think they were kind of writing on people's just like, oh well, we're just, you know, here for the ride sort of a thing. And as a show in and of itself, it was a mess on so many levels. It was this is a critique I heard someone make of another movie, but I think it stands here. It had the feeling of it didn't feel like it was really saying anything, but whatever it was saying it loudly. Like, it just kind of was like a big mess of something that is opaque to the rest of us. So
kind of to bridge both of your points, it was like making Nick Fury this character that really we didn't see any emotional depth from in like the first couple of phases, all of a sudden have feelings, and we're supposed to be able to relate to them, right? And how do you, because most of these people like these in the audience and fans like Nick Fury because of the action part to it all. So all of a sudden insert feelings and like less action to a character, you're gonna have a bunch of audience members start being like, I don't like this character anymore, or I don't want to watch this character anymore, right? So we'll see what happens, because now it's Nick Fury with a bunch of women, right? And it's not gonna be, most audience members aren't gonna be like, oh, Nick Fury is the reason that this is bad. It's actually going to be all the women make being, next to Nick Fury not that great. So we'll see.
Yes. Yeah. And I think especially with the context of the last relationship with the woman that we saw he had in Secret Invasion, are kind of going to be like, what's going on? Also, I still so many questions about why is he on the ship. We saw at the end of Secret Invasion, he got up on the ship, and we're just like, I don't understand what's going on. Now he's there hanging out with Monica Rambeau, who we'll go talk about here in a second. There's just kind of like, it just kind of felt like it was a major filler episode, but it was a filler, very expensive filler series instead. So anyway, we probably don't need to carry on with the Secret Invasion slander, but that's where we are with Nick Fury, I guess. So moving on then to Monica. So we last saw, she was, introduced in WandaVision, last scene in WandaVision. So almost 3 years ago now was the last time that we got any engagement with her. So the first time we saw her was as a child in Captain Marvel, and I always forget that, which is going to be one of the big questions coming into this movie, is what's the relationship between the two of them. So any kind of thoughts on where we need to be going with her? I'm super excited to see Monica again.
I'm really excited for Monica, especially because when we did see her in WandaVision, she was kind of just a pacemaker for the story. She was a side character that kept the plot line going, because you had so much going on in terms of emotional capacity and story and character development going on with, Wanda. Here comes Monica. So like, do we get to see Monica in a bigger role, or is she still a side character in
Yeah,
this?
she was like the best friend, right? That kind of what I thought about her was like she was very much enabling like Wanda's bad behavior because she was so empathetic, right?
Oh,
Um, yeah, because she
yeah.
always kind of like stood up for Wanda in a way that I thought was like she shouldn't have.
See, I think that's a really interesting point because I mean, I have complicated feelings about how Wanda has been written in the NCU and how her story's has been played out in the MCU. But ultimately, I do like kind of I have a soft spot for her, partially because I think that she's been written poorly, but then also like I don't know, our feelings make us do weird things, but not even just feelings, but trauma, and trauma responds in different ways. And so I know that that's kind of like, was it the core of that show?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do, but I also question like is using trauma as an excuse for destruction something that white people always do, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
to justify the bad things they do, like weaponizing their victimization, right?
Right.
Which is I think is something that's very relevant today even.
Yeah.
And 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 to me it's like, can we tell another story that just because you're hurting that doesn't justify you hurting other people?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how Monica comes into play as a
Yeah.
character on her own now, though,
Mhm.
too, especially with, technically she isn't the main character, right? It is
Right.
still Carol Danvers to some
Mhm.
extent. Um,
Yeah.
and, there's so much that we need to this movie I'm hoping defines for Monica Rambeau, right? And like that also goes into like her powers. Like, are we
Yeah.
gonna actually see who she is slated to be in terms of like in the MCU universe? Because the rumor mill, the Marvel rumor mill, is saying that there's a possibility like that it might not be Photon that we thought it was. So
What are people saying? What else are people saying? I don't really
I've
listen to.
been seeing that people are saying that there's a possibility that may be Spectrum, which is interesting.
So can you
Because
explain a little bit of the difference between the two? Because I don't know.
from my understanding of the comics, and it's been quite a while, is that they're two very different characters. So
Oh,
I think
interesting.
Spectrum is related more to like the mutant side, which we can get into later. But we'll see what happens there, because the one thing we really haven't talked about yet is that this movie also has like changed since like 2019 multiple times, and like what it
Right.
is, and
Mm.
so
Yeah.
even just Monica's character could have changed, and it'll be interesting to see this premiere, how it's received, and then what we get to learn about after the fact, though, too, in terms of like changes.
Yeah. That's really helpful to know about the different, because it does seem like they probably are going to be leaning towards the mutant side of things again with Kamala Khan, who would also be kind of touching on today. So I do wonder about that. And I also, one of the things that I do think is really that a lot of people are going to be thinking about going into it too is her relationship with Carol. And I unfortunately think that ends up defining too much of her character is her relationship with Carol. And I think that ideally, and I think that that's the same for Kamala too, is that so much of their characters are defined by a relationship or non-relationship with or to Carol. And so I'm wondering with Monica, like obviously they're going to address that, but I'm wondering if it's going to be resolved, or if they're just going to kind of be like, yeah, it was super shitty, we're going to be dealing with this for a while, let's team up for this thing, and then I'm still going to be mad at you for a bit. Like, I'm wondering if we're actually going to get a full resolution here, and because I don't know if I was thinking about it today. I was like, I don't know if I want them to be like a full buddy by by the end. I don't know. And it kind of goes back to Shu's point about Monica. Ultimately, again, doing a lot of labor for these other characters and white characters typically to advance their plot points and to kind of serve in that support role for them. I wonder, I don't know, a little part of me is like, stay a little mad for a little longer. You've deserved it.
Right. It's like, doesn't her feelings and Monica's feelings and grief matter? Right. Like, and I think, same thing with WandaVision is just like, it doesn't seem like Monica's feelings were only secondary to Wanda's, right? That entire townspeople's feelings were secondary to this one white woman. I don't know if Marvel is at the place where they're ready to address like accountability for their superheroes. Like, can they just do whatever they want because they feel sad? Because I kind of saw that as like a common theme. It's like, oh, if you're angry, you can just lash out. As a like, I saw Kamran did that at the end of Miss Marvel. They're like, don't tell him his mom is dead because if he because if he knows, he'll kill everyone.
Yeah.
And it's just like, can we start questioning that? It's like, and I feel like sometimes, like, if I found out my mom is dead, I'm not going to kill everyone. You know what I mean? Like that like, there are other responses in the universe, you know?
I don't know. There are some things that if I was told it, I would maybe want to kill everyone. But
you wouldn't do it.
Mark there. No.
Exactly. I think there is that difference, right? Between like wanting to and like doing it, and then using that desire to justify you doing something.
Fair. I also think that's a really good transition point into talking about Kamala Khan, like, and who this character will be in this movie, because in Miss Marvel we see more of a preteen type storyline, right? And now we're getting this juxtaposition of this character amongst adults that have more complicated feelings. And so do we see this character grow and have the ability to have more pointed feelings though too, right? And have more accountability for what they are taking on as a superhero too. So it'll be interesting to see what happens now. And like Cecelia, you brought up she's a mutant, and that's where they're leaning, right? And
and so Miss Marvel, I know that like she was very, very, that whole series was extremely beloved, or at least from what I can tell. Now, Shu, you said that there was some backlash. I probably missed it then. On my feed, I saw a lot more of just like people outpouring, like huge outpours of love for her.
So what I do is I always go to like the Google reviews, and then so I always go to the Google reviews and I'll just look at the distribution of the votes. And what it is, it's always like a bunch of 5 stars and a bunch of 1 stars, right?
Yeah.
So
and everything. You love it or you hate it, and that's what.
And I think there was like some backlash about like how everything's like so woke, right? Or there's like
what a boring complaint.
And part of it, I don't know. My thing with Miss Marvel is like, I didn't really understand who she was in the series, right? Like, I didn't understand what made her tick, right? I could understand like especially if you watch the pilot, like her main obstacle was that she couldn't pass her driving test, and that her parents wouldn't allow her to go to the Marvel Con, right? But I don't know what breaks her heart. like I know not going breaks her heart, but I don't understand why. Like, why is she so obsessed with Marvel? Is it because like she doesn't feel like she fits in? And then why doesn't she feel like she fits in? You know, a lot of those things I feel like just wasn't explored to a depth where I felt like I knew who she was. Like, why does she love Captain Marvel so much? Is it because she feels like she wants to be extraordinary because she feels so not so ordinary, you know?
Sure.
Or like,
So
why does she fail her driver's test? Is because she's always so hard on herself? Like, these things are things I kind of wanted to know, like, because as a story writer, when you see just exterior plots happening, it feels like, oh, it's just the writer putting in things versus the writer actually exploring who she is.
sure. So yeah, and that is an interesting perspective. I will say, so because I work in, I could say, I do cultural studies, which sounds super
Mm-hmm.
fancy. So I come from a very different position. So like I have
Mm-hmm.
this sort of like philosophy of art that doesn't always mesh with people kind of behind the scenes or who do, especially people
Mm-hmm.
like within the academy, people who do media studies. But to me, I am really interested in the text as it is. And so like you kind of take it, it's almost like it's in the world and now it's an existential fact of what it is. Like,
Yeah.
and I am so interested in how it can be read and it can be interpreted. And so when it gets into her questions of identifying with Carol, the fact that it's ambivalent and ambiguous, I think is actually a really poignant remark on uh, teenage identity formation generally. It's
Yeah.
that's such like an open time. I could not tell
Mm-hmm.
you why I liked the things I liked then, and I could maybe come up with like a reason for it now, but a lot of it
Right.
is just kind of this like unhinged affection or desire that's just kind of like exploding into the world. And so I thought that that part of her was captured really well in the series.
Yes.
Like I don't think that she could articulate to you. I think it's just the fact that it's there and that
Right.
gives her the chance, now that she's going to actually be interacting with Carol and it's going to have some of the back and forth that might be part of her maturing, starting to grow up
Yeah.
through adolescence, is to begin to be like, okay, now I'm starting to gain the faculties I need in order to be self-reflective and ask those why questions. So I am like, I don't know. I'm kind of a fan of when texts, whether they're intentionally ambiguous or ambivalent or not, I kind of like it to be open
Mm-hmm.
because I think it invites readers or viewers, audiences, fans to begin to create kind of their own experience and reading of the thing. And I don't know. I really like that part of her
No,
personally. So
I think that's interesting that she likes her. But if you think about it in terms of like developing a show, right?
mhm.
If you don't have the shadow side of her, like the things she's ashamed about, the things she's afraid of, like it's hard to have longevity of a character, right, through many seasons, because the whole point is like you want these things, but there's something inside of you that keeps you from getting them, right? So like if you don't have that
Mhm.
shadow side of yourself, you're just like a fangirl, you become more one-dimensional as a character. And I feel like they left out the 3D part of Kamala in Miss Marvel in a way that I felt like was kind of like a missed opportunity. um so I wonder too, it's like in this movie, how can we bring her to be more than just a fangirl? Like what is her journey? Because your journey is, yes, your journey is to fight the bad guy. Whoops. Yes, your journey is to fight the bad guy, but your journey is also like uh, in order to overcome the bad guy, to overcome like the bad guy in yourself, right? Like the negative voices inside yourself. And I hope maybe here we have some of that. Like, does she like Carol because she doesn't feel like she's good enough, right? Like something like that. That's like very like simplistic. Does she feel like she's just not, and I got a little bit of that, but it wasn't to the point where like, oh, it's because she always felt so othered, or it's because she's such a klutz that she can't pass her test, that she's so much of a bumbling person that she can't even pass her driver's test. And to me, I think because that foundation wasn't really laid in her original show, that's why maybe it didn't get a second season, right? Because when you don't have that engine, it's hard to carry it for multiple seasons of a TV show, because that's what drives. It's like a character confronting their shadow over and over again is what drives a show, right? If you think about, that's what makes a really good main character. And I hope in this movie, like, we'll see her dealing with her own personal flaws. I think that would be really interesting, or her own personal fears.
Yeah.
Which I think is very possible, right? Because I think also in terms of casting, Kamala has the most side characters or ensemble characters surrounding her coming into this movie, right? With her family being a large part of it. So we'll see maybe possibility that growth that you, and also maybe that ambivalence that you're both like kind of talking about too. So, and maybe a large part of this movie, and hopefully to some extent not, is that she is just going to see Carol Danvers as a mirror, and that's how the type of character development that we'll get.
So maybe she'll struggle with her powers a little bit, and then
yeah, and she is. So there's something to the bangle too. That is the thing that's entangling their power, or it seems like that is the object that's causing their powers to get all entangled with each other. So I did a quick Google search to make sure that I had the name, because I don't know who these new characters are. So it looks like Dar Ben is going to be, who Zaw Ashton is playing, is going to be, I think that she's the villain, or at least she looks like the villain from the trailers. And from what I can tell, it looks like she's got the other bangle. And so I am really interested to see what they're doing with that. I do find it interesting that they definitely ethnicized that object, and to see this sort of like Middle Eastern artifact be the thing that's kind of forcing this female all women coalition to form, essentially, is this really interesting move to, I don't know, I mean, it's definitely, there's obviously the read that is very appropriatey or orientalist, and it also kind of speaks to this like general impulse in Western culture for like the past 20-30 years, who are really really into, obsessed with Eastern cultures, the whole eat pray love situation. Everybody's into meditation and yoga and all of that. And to see that being the thing that seems to be what is causing them to come together, I don't know. I am always kind of like I always look for like a reparative read of a thing, but I can see how that is a little it can be a bit dicey. So
totally. And I also think that that was one of the criticisms that like die-hard comic book fans are talking about, is that Miss Marvel's powers were switched that into this bangle, right? So
wait, what was her powers
weird
originally? Sorry to interrupt, but what
so because she has a mutant background, she had her powers just as an individual, not because of an actual artifact. And then they switched it to an artifact for the show.
So in the comics, the original comics, she was an Inhuman, so it was like Marvel's response. So when the mutants were bought, or X-Men was bought by Fox or whatever, and there's this whole like blah 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 rights thing, the Marvel Comics response to it was to make the Inhumans, which is like another version of the mutants, and she was one of the first iterations of that. The original author, whose name I forget, really was attached to Kamala being being a mutant, but that was scrapped. Her original powers, though, were like the stretching, morphing, shape shifting sort of power. So she kind of was able to more of her
I
body
see.
into things. She had these stretchy powers, which I don't know if this is actually the reason that they changed it, but it's it looks similar to Reed Richards' powers. I think that was one of, I can't remember if that was one of the reasons they cited, but they changed it all together. They changed her powers all together. So now she's got like these light powers, and it looks like it was to kind of intersect with Monica's and Captain Marvel's powers. So that way they can have kind of like thing. And as a plot device, like it kind of, I can understand it. I do think that the conceit of this film being that their powers are entangled around this sort of object is interesting. But a lot of the frustration around changing her powers in the first place was because it allowed for a really interesting reflection on her relationship with Carol Danvers, or her obsession with Carol Danvers, because she has this whole run, like this whole, issue where she does change into Carol Danvers. And so she changes from this, young brown Muslim girl into this blonde white woman who is her kind of like hero, and has this moment of being able to disidentify with herself and with that character and with that person.
That's so interesting.
So it's a really interesting thing. I know that the backlash to changing her powers is incredibly like very, very valid.
Vitriolic. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and for good reasons. I am hopeful that it seems like they might be able to do something really interesting with them in this movie and still allow for that moment of figuring out identification, like the process of identification, because her identity, she's a teenager, it's always in flux. Identity is made up anyway, it's always self-fashioned, but whatever, that's a whole other conversation for probably a different, I don't know, space. But I do think that that this will still be introduced, and I'm excited to see.
I see.
So yeah,
it kind of changes her whole character by changing her whole power.
It does. Yeah, it does, and there's a lot to be said.
Yeah.
For
yeah,
sure.
I mean, to think of like instead of it like being like her desire to be different people, it's now just like a little object, right, that she can carry around. So it kind of dehumanizes her a little bit in that sense. Instead of, and I don't know if I'm like quite putting this into the right words, it feels like it minimized how her power is connected to who she is as a person, and it's no longer connected to that. It's literally outside of her, and it's in kind of this like misappropriated symbol that's through the Western Orientalist gaze, right? That's like a bangle, right? I think that's very interesting, and I think that goes to the whole commercialization and like surfacecation, like just putting things at a surface level versus going deeper into the story of a character. I feel like that's very true to what Marvel has been doing a lot in a lot of their projects. And I hope they do something with it.
Yes, I think that then that gets us to Carol Danvers, who arguably is at the center of this whole thing, although it does seem like they've worked really hard to make that not be the case. It's hard not to, because she's the only one who's been like in a movie so far, or a movie played by the actor who's going to be here now. Monica was in the first one, child Monica. But yeah, so Carol, I guess so the last time we saw her was, she showed up in the middle of Kamala's bedroom, or Kamala's bedroom, and she, from their like entangled powers, right? And that seems to be in this movie. But I think that the most significant recent appearance that we've had from her was actually, she's in the post-credits scene of Shang-Chi with Bruce Banner and Wong and Shang-Chi and Aquafina's character, who I don't know why she was there, and I don't I don't remember who's to say, but she was there too. Real fun. But yeah, so she showed up as like holographic version and then just ducked out. And they were looking at the rings, the 10 rings. And they're like, this seems to be like this homing, blah, blah, blah. That's the whole thing. So I am wondering, do you think, I feel like there's lots of conspiracy theories, lots of theories around that. So, yeah, Shivani, do you have any thoughts on that?
I really don't actually. I'm really curious to see where they go with that because I honestly it threw me for a loop too, and I feel like at some point Marvel was like we need to put more emphasis on Carol and make her more likable to the audiences,
Right.
but I don't know if they were just like, let's throw everything at this character and see what sticks, or if they were like, we're gonna actually show you how important Carol Danvers is. Because Carol Danvers as a character in the comics is quite important, but I don't know if in the cinematic university people want to see her that much. So we shall see.
I mean, to be honest, the Captain Marvel is like whenever I do rewatches, it's one of the movies that I'm less excited to watch because I think that, and I think Jake made this point too when they did the original podcast on it and a few times since, that the amnesia storyline that they do with her is not compelling at all. It kind of ends up like flattening her quite a bit, and her response to it is just like, I don't remember things, and now I'm starting to kind of, and then I'm gonna duck out. Like I just can't quite figure out what her deal is, and she seems like, you know, she's able to get away with things because she's, you know, OP'd or whatever. But she's a tough character to bond with, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that goes back to like, what is the universal thing that we can latch onto with her, right? They tell her like she's too emotional, but we don't really see her wrestling with her emotions the way, you know, like if her like just from like writing a character point of view, if her problem is that she's too emotional, she at first would try to like clamp down on her emotions and try to like fit in with no emotions, and then she realizes that doesn't work. It, you know, it hits her back in the face, and then she had to wrestle with like how to deal with her emotions in order to fit into this world, right? And that's how like the character would come full circle, but we don't see that in Captain Marvel, right? We just see just like so much facts again, which is like very cerebral, but it's like not something I can connect to on like a visceral level, right? And that's why I felt like people don't really like her, even though Brie Larson acted the shit out of that role. She's such a good actor.
Which I also think they just were like, we need to give audiences a woman now.
Yeah.
And Academy Award winner Brie Larson?
Yes, yeah.
That on her name. How if she can't add depth to this character, then wasn't he ever meant to be more? Or was it ever given the opportunity to be more? And then, you know, but that like kind of leads us into these like big plot questions, right? That we're going into for this movie. What are the like thematic questions? What are we getting with the villain? Things like that. Anyone want to take it away?
I have no idea what's going on with the villains. Like they said, you know, in one of the recent TV spots, and you know, AC's not here, and AC would be the one who would be like in this TV spot and that TV spot, over in like doing all the indexing of things. I don't have that kind of recall. But in one of the recent ones, they made this comment about how she is attacking every world they call home or something like that, which is a really interesting concept. Like there's this idea of home that this movie is kind of engaging with, it seems, for these, you know, three characters who are incredibly displaced in several different ways. So Carol is displaced by, you know, having amnesia and is just kind of I don't know, universe hopping, trying to like save one planet to the next. Monica is displaced like temporally because she was blipped. She came back, everything was different. She's just like, all right, I'm just gonna do this next thing then. And then Kamala seems to be, it's sort of this question of like, you know, immigrant families, sort of a displacement situation. So all of these characters are very displaced, it appears. And then there's this question of home. So I am really interested to see what those homes are and the significance they have to these characters.
Oh, also, I would say that Monica also kind of represents the like military displacement, you know, military family aspect as well, right? Because that Monica is our military representation in this movie, I believe. So,
Yes.
very interesting intersection there too.
Yeah.
But you know, it's also really interesting that the movie with the women is also the movie that we're gonna define what home is. Because
Mhm.
I would say that you could have easily done that also with probably like Endgame and whatnot, right?
Mhm.
Because you're
Mhm.
protecting home and you could define that. But um, yeah, I don't know. I'm not really sure if um the displacement story even hits well with most audiences because it's
Mhm.
also a very specific story to who is intersecting in the audience, right? So
Well, and it does, I do think that the ideas of a home or a homeness, because it seems like, you know, maybe whether or not they have like serious connections to physical places is one thing, but then the kind of affective or emotional state of homeness or the feeling state that a home creates is something that's going to be explored a little more. The only other place I think recently in a Marvel movie, and this is technically Sony, that I think could possibly engage with that was Across the Spider-Verse. And that was like definitely a home and family thing, and kind of pushing back on to Shu's point earlier about trauma, whether or not you actually need to have like a serious traumatic event in order to like be a good person or a hero and overcome things and do good things, you know, or like whether that has to be canon. So yeah, and the fact, I mean, Shiv, you make a good point about the fact that it is this woman-led uh, movie that seems to be kind of bringing up those questions. I think it's really
like
interesting.
and it's interesting in the sense of like is home more of like where there is a role where there's a woman to care for you in some sense. Um and I think that you can look at some of these characters as like women who are kind of these people that are to actually go to towards shoes and your points, Cecilia. You know, even just Monica, she was caring for Wanda the most, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um we can see that. And I don't know, but then that also leads to the question of like who's the villain in this.
I mean,
And
I don't know. I wonder, what is there a scenario where Marvel really names the villain as the one who displaced these people, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is it the Empire building people who are,
Mm-hmm.
that is the actual villain, right? I think there was like a little bit of missed opportunity in Miss Marvel of like not making like some British Empire entity as the villain versus
Mm-hmm.
versus
Right.
just like random, like what are they called, like shadow newer people, or
Oh,
yeah, Najima, yeah. And it's like, to me, that rings more true as the villain, right? Like,
mhm.
and I because at the end of the day, it would make, I think, a better movie if they're all joining together to battle this bigger thing that has
Mhm.
caused like harm to all of them.
Mhm.
And there was a little bit of that in Captain Marvel, which I actually really enjoyed, is how like
Mhm.
the scrolls, is that what they're called?
Yeah,
Yeah, the
we
scrolls are, we thought they were the villain, but they were actually the displaced people, and
right.
it's it's actually the people doing the displacing that they're actually fighting, right?
Yeah. And
I
the
think
question there of empire is super interesting because it makes me wonder if like she got all Carol got all implicated with the Kree for so long, realized that was like
right.
one of the big bads, and then was just like, all right, I'm gonna do my own thing. I can't trust any of you motherfuckers to do it, so I'm just gonna take care of this myself.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna hop around, clean up some fires. So in that way, I very much can empathize with her. And there's that whole shot of her like in her Crocs, like her rainbow Crocs, playing the laser with Goose.
Oh man.
She got big work.
I feel like more people are excited about Goose than they are like the actual characters of this movie, which is kind of scary in some sense.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about like new characters though too, also we gotta talk about Park Seo-joon in this movie. Yay, K-drama representation meets Marvel.
Very exciting.
It's the possible love interest is what we're hearing for Carol Danvers. Which does Carol Danvers need a love interest is my question. But I will take some Park Seo-joon any day, except for that wig that I keep seeing him wear because he has fantastic hair without a wig. I marvel. I don't know what we're doing there because he is a beautiful, beautiful man.
The wig is messed up.
Yeah, and it's like, is the only way to make Captain Marvel relatable is by making her somebody's girlfriend, right? Like, is that the only lens? Like, we can only understand women through lens of the patriarchy.
Right. Because, it's so frustrating because on the one hand, like I am personally a big sucker for a romantic storyline.
Me too. Oh my god, I would love it.
Marvel sucks at it, like famously sucks at it, and so I'm like would really love to see it. And Brie Larson can play a romantic lead like well, and so I would like to see that. I just need it. I would like to see it make sense. I would also the pictures of her with him in that dress that she has on. That dress is horrible. Like, or maybe it's just me. The dress looks so stupid. I hate it.
She doesn't match him well, and it's also disappointing to see this character of an international actor who has tons of fame and claim also be matched up against her and probably not have the best. I don't know. It doesn't look like good chemistry from one still. Like what? I'm curious to see what it is an actual film, but I don't know.
But it's just the cursed wig and the cursed dress that's bringing that still down. And maybe that's actually this incredibly
and I feel like and I feel like Hollywood has a really tough time writing Asian men as leads. They're usually like made much more effeminate, or there's something usually like very fetishistic and orientalistic whenever they do appear on screen.
100%.
So I'm like a little nervous, especially seeing the wig. And it's just like, oh, I hope he's like a good character.
I know.
I was just gonna say, which is really interesting because he is also known for playing some of the most like iconic characters in Korean cinema and television. So for that to not translate over to Marvel will be really interesting. And hopefully it does, though. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And I wonder,
go ahead. Like a Steve Yeun like Walking Dead moment where they didn't think they could do it, but then like he's so good that
he's Walking Dead. I was like, oh, that was a good one. But no, I wonder then too, because we've been so concerned about how this movie is going to be received. I wonder if he does change it. Like he's kind of bringing with him a whole other audience that maybe Marvel. I don't know what Marvel's success, with like many international, especially like Korean audiences are, or people who are like big fans of Korean cinema and art generally. Like what is he gonna bring that into it? I don't know how that might change like the audience makeup.
Well, because like the most recent Marvel thing that you could really put side by side in terms of that type of thing is the Eternals, right? And the Eternals wasn't well received despite being honestly a beautifully created piece of media. But so it'll be interesting to see. Let's use this actor to pull in different audiences and see what happens.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
I hope that like
that is-
it seems like he has enough charisma to like pull something in. So
yeah.
I think, yeah. And that's the thing. It's like a lot of these stars are like Tony Leung, like they're such
Yeah.
superstars in themselves that like you can give them anything and he'll just like people will just glue themselves to the screen, right? Like he can
Yes.
read the back of his cereal box and be like, I'm there.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so thank God, yeah, like thank God, like he is such a big star that at least there, I have some faith in that.
Yeah. Well, now I'll have to go find some of his works before and go see what else he's been in. But I'm also like really excited to see maybe if he's got like good scenes with Iman Vellani, who's also just a real like star power force.
Mm.
Just like explodes charisma. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe that'll shake things up a
Yeah.
little bit. So because like Carol's been so serious for so long, I'm like,
Right.
I do hope that I don't know what I'm allowed to say on the main feed, so I'm not gonna say it, but I do hope she's getting digged down at least a little bit.
yes.
Yes. I would like to see an Asian man dicking someone down on the main campus, right? Has that happened yet? That didn't happen in Shang-Chi, right? That was like the big thing, right? He didn't have a love interest.
Right. I know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I do love Simu Liu. Like he's also one
Of
of those people
course.
that's got enough charisma to like
Yeah.
I
He's so
just
charming.
he's so
Yeah.
charming. And I do think
Yeah.
eventually he'll probably get one and it'll be I don't know. I'm kind of down for the slow burn with him. I think that would that'd be good. But my only other thing, I guess we kind of been thinking about it all throughout, but I am really interested in the fact that like we do also need to really really hammer home that this is like a mixed race team of women, right? And this kind of
Mm.
like harkens back to, at least to me, as far as like within feminist history, it harkens back a lot to like some of those 70s coalitions that
Mm.
a lot of like the Barbara Smiths were leading charge on, and Sherry Moraga's and Gloria Anzaldua's like 70s, 80s, 90s feminist coalition movements that were often like,
Mm.
there's huge critique to be lodged against white feminism and white women feminism, but especially in like the 70s and 80s and 90s there was a ton of women all working together and
Yeah.
really pushing each other often on what it looks like to be a feminist and how to include, be a more inclusive feminism and to
Right.
attend to matters of race and class and all of that stuff. And so I am excited to see it just for that basic
Right.
representation. So I don't know
Yes.
if y'all had
I
any
mean, we have
thoughts.
to start somewhere, right? Like we
Indeed.
Yeah.
No, I'm really excited for it. I really do hope that it doesn't get to a talking point though of like, oh, this is Marvel's version of like DEI or like
Mm.
diversity. Because that's a stupid point to make. And it's a stupid point if we're really growing the the cinematic universe and introducing all these new characters. At some point it will just become diverse because you
Right.
live in a diverse world
Right.
and that's how characters interact.
And I
Like
think that it's like actually unfair to the characters and to the actors to just automatically be like, well, because it's Disney, it's just corporate DEI. Like it's that this diversity is just an institutional thing that's just there for capitalism, corporate greed, which is like there is that to it as well. But I'm also like you cannot negate the fact that like this does mean something. It's still quite significant, and so I am like trying to figure out, there's ways to look at it to problematize it, but then other ways to look at it where like, well, I mean, this is a huge representation
I
thing.
think, yeah. I think like what I hope is just like I hope this is what they won't do, is just like, they're going to put this movie out. There's going to be a bunch of backlash. Instead of like taking some of the critiques and maybe like make the characters more well-rounded, they're just going to be like, oh, because there's backlash, we're not going to do this anymore, right? We're going to tell less diverse stories. And I feel like that's actually happening a lot in Hollywood, is because the ground level story wasn't good enough. They're not going to tell anymore, or they're going to tell less diverse stories because of backlash. And I wish like they would take, if there's going to be criticism, they would take it and be like, okay, let me figure out what I can do better to make this more palatable, to make this more universal, and then come up with another version that's better and more diverse. And I hope that's what this movie and what the executives and people in the studios would do, and look at whatever criticism they would get, you know, versus just shutting it down.
Which I think Marvel does need to do, because Phase 5 hasn't been good and it hasn't been received well. And if we're just going to get, you know, and I do think that this movie a little bit is being set up to be the fall guy for a lot of Phase 5 failing. And that's not okay either. So instead, and you know, you've both touched on it, like if we're not doing this press tour, we're also hurting because we're not giving this film the opportunity to actually be the good film out of Phase 5. Instead, we're just saying, all right, these are all the things, from diversity to women to you know, plot lines of bringing in all these different characters, not instead of just focusing on one character, is gonna be the fault, and that's not fair in any way.
Yes.
And I part of it is just like, we need to develop more writers who can write characters of different colors and genders with the full roundedness of, let's say, an Iron Man or a Spider-Man, right? We need to really invest in that, you know, and it just can't be like, oh, Miss Marvel didn't work out, we're not gonna do these stories anymore. We need to like really give people like the decade or so working in TV and to keep developing these stories. And I hope like that's what we should be looking forward to. And Shivani, I'm sure you're doing this, and that's one of your hopes too, as a person of color developing stories, that like your goal is to develop stories that fulfills all the DI requirements, but also make them so human that anyone can identify with them.
It's the question of taking the very, very idiosyncratic and personal and making it universal. That's the
exactly. And you know, actually, because now I have the Disney login, I took a quick peek at like a more American-born Chinese. I don't know if you've seen that. And I thought that, and like
actually about it, but I don't know. I've heard some good things, but I haven't heard much.
I mean, like it's very interesting because as a comparison to Miss Marvel, it deals with very similar themes. It's about a kid in the same age from an immigrant family, and you just see the difference. Like in American-born Chinese, you see like, oh, feels like he's not good enough. He feels he's really uncool, partly because of his Chinese family, and you see like the villain of the community who doesn't accept him in a way. And you see that on a larger level of like the racism that's perpetuated in society, and just the microaggressions that really play out. And then you see another Chinese character where it doesn't really bother him, and in that way it's not about him being Chinese, it's about his own personal shame that he has to deal with. And in that way, I felt that was so universal, and I felt that made the character so compelling. And you know, and like the thing is, the writer of that show, he was on Bob's Burgers for 10 years and I feel like we need to kind of invest in writers of color, because it takes a while. Even as a writer myself, it takes a while to start really writing stories that are not through the white supremacist gaze. Because a lot of the way, I mean, just me speaking for myself, I felt like for a long time, a lot of the ways I view myself in my own stories is through the white gaze, right? Because that's very hard to, because you see yourself as like, oh, as the stereotype, or like my problems are because of my Chinese family, versus like, oh, actually it's my own relationship to shame and who I am. That's the actual thing I should be looking at. Versus like, oh, Miss Marvel, she just has a really strict family and that's her main problem.
Yeah, and I think that they do a good job in the show to dispel that pretty quickly. Like you can just
Yeah, I
tell
do.
that's all very based in love, and so those
That's true.
sorts of idiosyncratic things I think are really interesting.
Yeah.
My family is Cuban, and so there's also those very specific questions of like, oh my gosh, what is, my identity, and there's this
Right.
idea
Yeah.
of guilt and so there's these very specific things, unique to different intersections that you can pull out, and really zoom out. And I think that there is the potential for that to happen here. I'm hoping that we are going to get some very idiosyncratic stories, because these characters are all coming from pretty different, radically different projects, and they're coming together. So I'm really interested to see how they'll come together. So
yeah, and the director is a very well-respected Black director.
Yeah, Nia DaCosta, I completely spaced that we didn't talk about her, but just really quickly, like Nia DaCosta wrote and directed is it Candyman? That I believe. And which was, if you haven't seen it, it is actually very good and you should watch it. But Nia DaCosta also is coming between a lot of backlash right now, and with Shuo and I both working in film and television, I really got to quickly address this for anyone who's, because I keep seeing these articles coming out that Nia DaCosta left this film in post-production, and that maybe that's why this film wouldn't be good. But it is very common practice to be in a completely different studio, a completely different country, different state, working on post-production and working on a totally different film. And to have, the Marvels have this negative talking point that Nia DaCosta did post-production somewhere else while also working on another film, that is very common practice. There are multiple directors that work on multiple projects at the same time, and that work on post-production somewhere else while they're filming something else. And we've also seen it in Marvel. I believe Joss Whedon did it with the Avengers. Jake is giving me the note that Steven Spielberg made the entire movie The Post while Ready Player One was in post-production. So this negative criticism that is coming towards this movie because of Nia DaCosta doing this is not fair. And you do have to bring up the point that this is a Black woman directing, and if it was a white man, would that be the same thing that you would be bringing up? Or is it like, let's just throw this woman under the bus because we can, and she will take the fall for this movie? And that is not fair.
Yeah, and roping into part of the bad backlash about the movie itself. Like there's all these, they just feel they're all so enmeshed in each other, all these critiques that are being lodged. Thank you for dispelling that for us. We need those, behind the scenes.
Right.
for all of us regular old consumers of products.
But overall, I do just want to end on a positive note. There's clearly a lot of different things that are coming out about this movie, and but I am genuinely excited to watch this. I think that in this current moment, in what the world is right now, we need something that makes us feel a little bit good, and that's what media can do, and what media exists for, right? To not necessarily to entertain us, but also to help us just like disassociate a little bit. Sometimes we need to disassociate a little bit, and I'm excited to watch this movie, so I hope others do have that excitement. And I do think it's also a film that you can take your whole family, and like, which used to be Marvel all the time, and enjoy all of these characters and a little bit of fun.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, I have a little girl who kind of associates all superhero movies as boy movies. And so my version, little Cecelia is like, let's go. We love the superhero movies. So I'm looking forward to having that moment together. And yeah. Any final thoughts from you, Shu?
And I think at the end of the day, it is, no matter how incomplete it is still a movie about girl power. These are great characters. The actors are amazing. So I have faith that they'll at least add something to it. So it'll be, and I'm sure it'll be visually stunning, and I'm gonna go see it.
I'm gonna have a good time. I can also tell there's gonna be lots of laughs, and I think that laughs are a good thing to have right now. So I guess we will wrap up there on our happy notes. Before we sign off, Shu, where can we find you and your work on socials, etc.?
I'm pretty dark on socials. So yeah, I mean,
what's your personal
don't find me. Yeah, so I mean, as a writer, to me, it's just me writing my best script, my best idea, and I hope it comes into fruition. And I think for me, like, the best way to support me is to, really get to know, like, people that are different from you, because I want to write characters that don't exist so much in Hollywood, so like, I think if people are just really open to different people and find out about who they are, and I think that would be the best thing to help my career.
Yes, so good.
Well, we might be able to see you with the Working Family Parties.
That's true, yes.
The Artist Council. So
yes,
we might be able to see your
true.
work there. You can IMDb Shu if you really want to.
I do run the Philly WGA Twitter handle. So if you want to follow our labor movement in Philadelphia, you can follow Philly WGA.
Will do. And you, Shiv?
You can find me on social everywhere at Shivani Banfal. Right now, I am doing my thing as a human rights activist and organizer. So if you follow me and it's not Marvel, I'm just gonna let you know that. But if you're looking to find an intersection of both human rights stories and nerd fandoms, I'm the best person for you.
She is, you guys. Anyone who's not following Shiv is missing out. And you can follow me on socials anywhere at Cecelia M. Stokes, or Cecelia M. Stokes 1, and that's Cecelia M. Stokes. And then also definitely continue supporting this podcast. That was so wonderful for them to reach out and ask us to do this. Thanks to Jake, your super producer Jake Christie, and AC for inviting us. You should support them by subscribing to the Patreon. This Patreon is fantastic, and it's $3 a month for opening level, and that's how Shivani and I have been able to meet each other and talk. And as another little plug, in the next couple of weeks or so, I will be doing a podcast probably on the Patreon for Latino, Latinx, Latine Spider-Man fans as part of research for a project I'm conducting in the fan world. And frankly, I am just a Latina who loves Spider-Man. I'm trying to turn it into research so I can get funding. So great, exciting things.
We love that. We love supporting. Join the Discord if you want to find more like-minded individuals that are listening to the pod as well as interacting. It's an amazing community. And they are pivoting to YouTube as well. So if you have yet to subscribe and like their YouTubes, please go to the MC University YouTube and check them out, because we love video here, right? So go to the YouTube.
We're in the visual age, guys. The visual era. So, well, for Shivani, for Shu, and for myself, thank you for listening. Catch y'all next time.